Ever feel like your brain is working against you? Especially when you're down. Like it's amplifying the negative and muting the positive.
Yeah.
Well, we're diving deep into the science behind that feeling today.
Okay.
It's all about groundbreaking research on depression and the amygdala, the brain's emotional headquarters.
Interesting.
It is. We'll be breaking down some pretty complex studies,
Okay.
but don't worry, we'll make sure it's all clear and engaging.
Sounds good.
Imagine rewiring those neural pathways to help people who are battling depression. That's what we're talking about.
Wow.
We are going to unpack how depression changes the way our brains actually see the world.
Okay, let's get started.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
For those who might be new to neuroscience,
Sure.
the amygdala. It's like a little almond-shaped structure deep inside the brain,
Right.
and it acts as our emotional control center.
It does.
So it's constantly assessing our environment, figuring out, is this a threat or is this a reward?
Exactly. And that's where our fight or flight response comes from, when we sense danger.
Right.
But it also lets us feel joy and attraction. The amygdala.
Wow. So it really covers the whole spectrum.
It does.
But here's the thing. New research has shown that in people with depression, the amygdala actually functions differently.
It does, yeah.
So this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
People with depression, they often experience what's called a negativity bias.
Right.
They perceive things, even neutral or positive things, more negatively than others. And it's not just, being pessimistic. It's a real biological change in how the brain is processing information.
Yeah, that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just a personality trait.
Exactly.
It's a change in the brain.
Right. And so scientists, they used to think this negativity bias was a result of depression.
Right.
But now they believe it might actually contribute to causing it and making it stick around.
Yeah, it's a fascinating shift in our understanding.
It is. So how did scientists make this connection?
Well, researchers studied mice.
Okay.
Mice with depression-like symptoms.
Right.
And they also studied human patients diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Okay.
And what they found is similar patterns in both groups.
So you're seeing this altered amygdala activity in both animal models and human subjects.
Correct. And what's even more fascinating is they were able to pinpoint specific neural circuits
Okay.
within the amygdala that behave differently.
So they're really zeroing in.
They are. They found that neurons responsible for processing positive stimuli, those were less active. And the neurons that process negative stimuli, those were more active, both in mice and humans.
It's almost like the brain is dimming the happy signals
Yeah,
and turning up the volume on the sad or the fearful ones.
exactly. A great way to put it. And this misfiring of signals within the amygdala, it can really impact how a person with depression sees the world.
Right.
Even neutral or positive events can feel negative.
So this all sounds a little bleak. Is there any hope here?
This is where things get really exciting. Researchers were actually able to partially reverse the negativity bias in mice.
Really?
Yeah, by artificially stimulating those positive encoding neurons.
So giving those happy signals a boost
Exactly.
can happen.
Well, the mice showed improvements in their behavior. Less anxiety. Fewer despair-like behaviors.
Wow. So they were able to manipulate those brain circuits and actually see a positive change in behavior.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you're saying we might actually be able to rewire the brain to combat depression?
It's a possibility. This research opens up a whole new avenue for developing treatments that target the root cause of this negativity bias,
Okay.
instead of just managing the symptoms.
So instead of just trying to make someone with depression feel better,
Right.
we could actually target the part of the brain that's misinterpreting the world around them.
Exactly. The implications are huge. Imagine a future where treatments could actually help people with depression experience the world in a brighter, more hopeful way, not just by changing their mood, but by fundamentally changing how their brain perceives and responds to its surroundings.
That's incredible.
It really does offer a lot of hope. And think about it, the implications for other mental health conditions too.
Yeah.
If we can figure out how these neural circuits work,
Uh-huh.
imagine the breakthroughs we could have in treating anxiety,
Right.
PTSD,
Right.
even chronic pain.
Wow.
All these conditions, they have strong emotional components.
Yeah, that's true. So it's like science fiction becoming reality, rewiring the brain to ease suffering.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier that researchers used a mouse model for depression in these studies.
Right.
Can you tell us more about that? Like, how can we be sure that what they see in mice actually translates to humans?
Well, scientists use animal models, like mice, because they share a lot of biological similarities with us. But it's important to remember, animal models aren't perfect replicas of human conditions.
Sure. I mean, there are obvious differences between a mouse brain and a human brain.
Of course.
So how do scientists account for those differences when they're looking at the results?
Well, they use a lot of different techniques to validate their findings
Okay.
to make sure the results are relevant to humans.
Okay.
In this particular study, they backed up their findings in mice with observations from human patients
Okay.
diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Got it. So seeing these similar patterns of activity in both mice and humans, that strengthens the argument that this negativity bias is a real thing.
Exactly. Not just something that's only happening in the mouse model.
Right.
And it's important to note that this research builds on a lot of other evidence suggesting the amygdala's role in depression.
Okay.
This isn't just one isolated study. It's
Yeah.
part of a bigger scientific conversation that's been going on for years.
So that's reassuring. It sounds like scientists are starting to get a more complete picture of how depression affects the brain.
They are.
And this new research is an important piece of the puzzle.
It is. And the more we understand about the underlying mechanisms of depression, the better we'll be able to develop effective treatments.
That makes sense. Speaking of treatments, you mentioned earlier that researchers were able to partially reverse the negativity bias in mice.
Right.
What does that actually look like? Did the mice suddenly become all happy and carefree?
Well, we can't ask a mouse how it's feeling,
Right. Of course not.
but we can observe changes in their behavior.
Right.
And in this study, what they saw was that stimulating those positive encoding neurons in the amygdala, it led to a decrease in behaviors that are associated with anxiety and despair.
So they weren't necessarily happy, but they were showing less distress.
Exactly. And fewer of those negative behaviors.
Okay.
And that's a big deal because it suggests that targeting those specific neurons, it could have a real impact on depressive symptoms.
I'm curious, how did they stimulate those neurons in the mice? Did they have to do brain surgery or implant something?
No, it's a really elegant technique called chemogenetics. And it lets scientists activate or inhibit specific groups of neurons using engineered proteins that respond to certain drugs.
So they basically gave the mice a drug that activated those happy neurons.
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
They introduced a virus that delivered the engineered proteins to the target neurons. And then, by giving them a specific drug, they could control the activity of those neurons.
That's some impressive neuroscience. It's amazing that we can manipulate brain circuits with that kind of precision.
It is.
But I imagine this technology is a long way off from being used in humans.
It is. While chemogenetics is a very powerful research tool, there are still a lot of hurdles to overcome
Okay.
before it can be used safely and ethically in people.
I understand.
Mm.
But even if chemogenetics itself isn't the answer, just being able to target those specific neurons is a huge step.
It is.
It opens up the possibility of developing other methods
Right.
that are less invasive to get the same result.
Absolutely. And that's where the real excitement lies.
Right.
This research isn't about finding one single solution.
Got it.
It's about opening up entirely new avenues for exploration,
Okay.
for treating depression and other mental health conditions.
It's like we've been wandering around in the dark, and now someone's flipped a light switch.
Yeah.
We can actually see a path forward.
That's a great analogy. But it is important to remember this is just the beginning. There's
Okay.
still so much more to discover. And the possibilities for improving human well-being, they're really inspiring.
I am definitely feeling inspired. This research has given me a whole new perspective on depression
Good.
and the incredible potential of neuroscience to help us understand and treat mental illness.
It's amazing what science can do.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. The amygdala, the negativity bias, animal models, chemogenetics,
We have.
even the ethical considerations of manipulating brain circuits. This has been a really deep dive into this research.
It has. And it's important to emphasize that while this research is incredibly promising, it's still in its early stages.
Okay?
There's still a lot of work to do before these discoveries become treatments that are widely available.
Right. We don't want to give anyone false hope.
Right.
But the idea that we might be able to directly target the root cause of this negativity bias, that's a huge leap forward. I'm really excited to see where this research leads in the future.
Me too. And, people should know that there is hope. Scientists are making incredible progress in understanding the brain and developing new treatments for mental illness.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, there are lots of effective treatments available for depression right now.
There are.
So if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out for help.
Well said. Seeking help is nothing to be ashamed of.
No, not at all.
And it can really make a world of difference.
This has been a really incredible deep dive.
It has.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking idea. We've been focusing on depression,
Right.
but I can't help but wonder about what this research means for other aspects of human experience, too.
I see what you mean. If we can understand how certain brain circuits contribute to negative emotional responses, could we also manipulate those circuits to enhance positive emotions? Could we actually amplify joy, creativity, and compassion?
That's a really captivating thought.
Yeah.
What if we could actually harness the power of neuroscience, not just to alleviate suffering, but to actually make people flourish?
It is a really profound question,
Yeah.
one that we'll probably be grappling with for years to come
Right.
as our understanding of the brain keeps evolving.
This whole conversation really highlights something we talk about a lot on the show,
What's that?
the power of perspective.
Okay.
If our brains can be wired to see the world more negatively, then they can also be trained to see things in a more positive, hopeful way,
Absolutely.
even without these really advanced interventions.
I totally agree. While scientific advancements offer these amazing possibilities,
Hmm.
we shouldn't underestimate the power of our own minds to shape our experiences.
Right.
Things like mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy,
Yeah.
even just surrounding ourselves with positive influences.
Yeah.
Those can have a huge impact on our emotional well-being.
It's a reminder that we're not just, at the mercy of our brains.
Right.
We have agency. We can actually choose to cultivate a more positive outlook.
We can. We can choose to focus on the good, challenge those negative thoughts,
Right.
and build resilience when we face tough times.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the amygdala and its role in depression,
Okay.
there's a really key takeaway here.
What's that?
While science is giving us these incredible insights into how our brains work,
Yes,
we also have the power to shape our own minds and experiences.
I do.
It's like a partnership
Yeah.
between the biological and the psychological,
Right.
the scientific and the personal.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's a good way to put it.
So it's really a reminder that we're all in this together. Scientists, therapists, individuals, all working towards a future where everyone can experience the world in a brighter, more hopeful way.
I like that. And on that note, I think it's time to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking idea.
Okay, I like it.
What if, instead of just trying to fix what's broken,
Uh-huh.
we also focused on amplifying the good, cultivating joy, resilience, and compassion?
Yeah.
Imagine the possibilities if we applied the same scientific rigor and ingenuity to understanding and enhancing human flourishing as we do to treating illness.
Wow.
It's a challenge, an invitation, a glimpse into a future where science and human potential work together
Yeah,
to create a world filled not just with less suffering, but with more joy, connection, and meaning.
I love that. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking the wonder and possibility that surrounds us all.